It's time once more for the Asia Brief, a collection of stories from the Asia-Pacific region you may have missed. Coming up, Malaysia's Prime Minister is in hot water after allegations of graft arise. South Korea and Japan come to terms on new UNESCO sites. Operators of a fatal ferry sinking are held accountable, and much more are coming up next. Ladies and gentlemen, it's great to have you here with me on this week ending July 10th, and we kick things off with a report from Malaysia that the Prime Minister is being targeted for graft. The Wall Street Journal and the Malaysia-based Sarawak report published findings alleging the Prime Minister received over $700 million from a government-owned investment fund named the 1MDB. During the tight 2013 election, papers say hefty sums of cash were transferred directly into Najib's account. The 1MDB fund, which is chaired by Najib, faces accusations of corruption, mismanagement, and is over $11 billion in debt. It is also under investigation by government agencies, including the Auditor General and the Central Bank. 1MDB responded by saying the fund never provided any funds to the Prime Minister, and called the reports highly irresponsible and an attempt to undermine the company. In a message posted to Facebook, Najib called the allegations concerted efforts by individuals to undermine confidence in our economy, tarnish the government, and remove a democratically elected prime minister. These latest claims, attributed to unnamed investigators as a basis to attack the prime minister, are a continuation of this political sabotage. Najib says he'll go after the publications, but that didn't stop commercial crime officers from conducting a raid on the 1MDB office. The Prime Minister's political secretary said the report was done with bad intention and based upon unsubstantiated and dubious sources. We will take legal action. Tian Chua, vice president of the opposition People's Justice Party, spoke out on the matter. We call upon the Prime Minister to step aside, take leave, to allow an independent investigation. The Prime Minister has to be out of the way to allow whistleblowers and investigators to act independently. Otherwise, there will be suspicions of intimidation and foul play. I'm concerned that whistleblowers and people who have information won't dare to come forward because of the immense power that the government holds in its hands. So far, 3 companies have been raided over the alleged transfer of funds and assets frozen in 6 different accounts. The Wall Street Journal's Hong Kong bureau chief Ken Brown told CNBC in an interview that the business paper is standing by its report, saying, "We are very careful and we believe the investigation and the documents we have are very, solid and come from a very reliable investigation and not a political investigation." It was announced this past Monday that Japan's list of Meiji-era industrial sites would make UNESCO's World Heritage List, despite initial opposition from Seoul over the use of forced Korean laborers. The bid initiated a diplomatic row that the 2 countries have been working on for months. Tokyo acknowledged Seoul's request and noted that Koreans and others were brought against their will and forced to work under harsh conditions in the 1940s at some sites. Japan will also incorporate measures to remember the victims, such as the establishment of an information center, it said, an assurance that led Seoul to lift its opposition to the listing. The South Korean Foreign Ministry said, for the first time, Japan mentioned the historical fact that Koreans were drafted against their will and forced into labor under harsh conditions in the 1940s. Japan's foreign minister was quick to note a distinction between the UNESCO site's language and legal responsibility to those forced to endure the harsh conditions, and that there has been no change in Tokyo's stance that the issue of reparations has been fully and finally resolved in the 1965 bilateral pact with Seoul to normalize diplomatic ties. But let's be honest, the notation is essentially a footnote, and Japan is already spinning the issue, just like it did with China with the dispute over the Senkaku and Diaoyu Islands. Tokyo says the expression forced to work in the statement is different from the expression forced labor or compulsory labor, which is banned by the 1932 Forced Labor Convention. Ah, yes, semantics at work once more. Something China jumped on right away and condemned. You know, I find it absolutely astonishing that Seoul didn't learn from Beijing's mistake. It was clear to me from the absolute onset that something like this was Japan's endgame. Now this particular deal with Tokyo has even caught even more attention. The Shokas Anjuku Academy in the Yamaguchi Prefecture happened to be one of the sites added under these Meiji sites. The academy taught a number of Japan's key leaders during Japan's expansion in the late 19th and 20th centuries. Some activists say the listing of the academy as World Heritage Sites is tantamount to allowing Japan to justify and beautify its militaristic past. Foreign Ministry spokesman No Kwang-il said, "We are reviewing ways to deal with the issue on various levels. We believed that it's not effective to take issue with that at the World Heritage Committee." Really? It seems like the appropriate time and place for me. Could it be that since the academy wasn't on the radar of the South Korean public, that it simply wasn't addressed, and the negotiations with Tokyo allowed for it to be listed? If one asserts that its listing allows Japan to justify and beautify its militaristic past, then it seems that it would be more damning than forced labor sites, unless no one was paying attention. If you recall, the former Seoul bureau chief of the Senkai Shimbun, Tatsuya Kato, was charged with defaming South Korean President Park Geun-hye after he printed rumors about her whereabouts during the Seoul ferry sinking in an online edition of his newspaper. Since then, he's been embroiled in a case to determine if his statements were in public interest. For that, in South Korea, defamation can occur even if statements are factually true. The litmus test is if the information serves the public good or was done to damage the other person's reputation. The trial is set to come to a close after 2 more hearings scheduled for July 27th and August 17th. Longtime Seoul reporter Donald Kirk said in court, "Correspondents of foreign media organizations often cite news content reported by the South Korean media when writing their own articles. Kato's column was of little significance on its own, but it drew a great deal of attention after it became the matter of a criminal case." Outside of South Korea, the general consensus is that the matter should be dismissed, but only time will tell if the South Korean courts will agree. 14 Thai students were arrested in late June after staging protests against the junta. Well, they've now been released. The military court released them earlier this week, while calls continue to come in for the government to drop all charges against the youths. They still face sedition charges. Police had argued to keep them under lock and key for an additional 12 days. Puan Tong Pawakapan, a political scientist at Chulalongkorn University, said, "At the beginning, the junta was reluctant to release the students temporarily, but I think they are concerned that the longer they detain the students, the more people will come out to voice their opposition to the junta." If convicted, the students face up to 7 years behind bars. Last week, North Korea told Tokyo it would once more not have a report ready on Japanese abductees. The message from Pyongyang read, "We are sincerely conducting a comprehensive investigation, but it will take a little more time." Prime Minister Shinzo Abe instructed his ministers to press the DPRK further and get results. "We'll stick to the principles of dialogue and pressure and action for action and do all we can to realize the return of all abductees," he said. Reports are that the clock on this diplomatic mission will run out next month. Now, I said from the get-go, this was a bad idea for Japan and to be ready for a bait-and-switch scenario. North Korea wanted something for nothing, and, well, they've gotten a year's worth. It's the same tactic North Korea has been using for years, and to think that Pyongyang would earnestly do any work on this issue, I think, was extremely naive. It's high time the world really takes a stand against North Korea. The practice of relieving sanctions with a promise from the Kims to behave just hasn't worked. Like a broken record stuck on repeat, it's high time to change tactics and treat North Korea differently. Demand actions before sanctions are lifted. Last week, over 60 people perished when a ferry capsized in the Philippines. This week, police filed murder charges against the owner and its crew. Lawrence Drake, an American who was on the ferry and survived, disagreed with complaints, saying that the crew members, especially the captain, did all they could to save the passengers. It's wrong. It's wrong. I feel bad, he told the Associated Press in a telephone interview. Initially, it was believed that bad weather caused the ferry to capsize, but authorities believe faulty maneuvering and overloading were contributing factors to the vessel's fate. Eyewitnesses said the vessel was buffeted by strong waves when it made a sharp turn. Passengers then crowded to one side of the boat, causing it to list. Over 140 passengers were rescued or swam ashore after the vessel capsized. Monday, MOYC, the 16-year-old video blogger, was due back in court for final sentencing. However, the day before, he was sent to the hospital due to low blood sugar levels. Yi had been remanded to the Institute of Mental Health to see if he was fit for reformative training. After a few hours of care at the hospital, he was released back to the facility to appear in court. The court found Yi guilty on 2 of 3 charges, one for making offensive or wounding remarks against Christianity, and another for circulating obscene imagery. A third charge related to his YouTube video about Lee Kuan Yew was withdrawn. In the end, Yi was sentenced to 4 weeks in jail, backdated to June 2nd. Essentially, time served, and he was released. Yi, through his lawyer, said he does plan on appealing the decision and attend counseling sessions. Phil Robertson, Human Rights Watch's Asia Division Deputy Director, had this to say following the decision. The sentencing of MOYC to what is essentially time served is a face-saving way for Singapore to say they were not wrong for prosecuting him when in fact the entire world community knows that they were. By causing such harm to Amos and his family, the biggest loser in this entire charade has been the Singapore government, which has shown that it is willing to run roughshod anyone who expresses opinions that challenge the government and its worldview, even when those opinions come from a 16-year-old. It was 1997 when Hong Kong was transitioned back to China. This year, on the 18th anniversary of the event, fewer people than expected came out to mark that handover. About 48,000 Hong Kongers took to the streets on July 1st, making it one of the annual protest's lowest turnouts since 2003, although police put that number at about 20,000. Joshua Wong, the young face of the Umbrella movement, said the lack of clear goals and direction for the pro-democracy movement's future has kept the numbers down, something I've been saying since day one. Zhang Jian of the Shanghai Institute for International Studies said pro-democracy activists need new issues to keep the public engaged, which will then pressure Beijing into renegotiating the city's reform agenda. But after a year of vocal opposition to Beijing's plan drew widespread international media attention, China is likely to offer the activists, little opportunities to engage. And that, according to O.E. Sun, is because entering again into a dialogue with pro-democracy groups risks a ripple effect to other parts of the mainland. Zhang also says that for Beijing, matters in Hong Kong will take a higher priority than those in Xinjiang or Tibet. O believes the next big political conflict in Hong Kong could manifest itself as the special autonomous region gears up for a 2022 chief executive election. In South Korea, the MERS crisis continues to wind down. 2 additional deaths were reported this week, the only ones in 8 days. Fortunately, fatalities are still far below the worldwide average at less than 20%. 35 people in South Korea have died after contracting MERS, with 186 contracting the disease. Of that number, 100 have also been released from care. Members from the Citizens Coalition for Economic Justice say they're planning on filing a class action lawsuit against several hospitals and the government seeking unspecified damages. This will be the second lawsuit the nation faces over the MERS crisis. Hospitals in South Korea that were once shuttered due to the disease have now reopened, and life is slowly returning to normal. In Thailand, there's more good news, as the gentleman from Oman who brought the disease into the kingdom has been cleared. But there has been a second case of MERS reported in the Philippines this week, again the result of a return visit from Saudi Arabia. Now, as I've said from the onset, well, the virus is dangerous. But unless you're elderly, unless you are immunocompromised, there's very little to worry about. So practice good hygiene and you'll be fine. When it comes to international sports, there's one game that captivates the world: football. It's played in more countries and followed by more people than any other sport. Sunday evening in North America and Monday morning here, the United States women's team squared off against Japan for the 2015 Women's World Cup. The United States scored within the first 3 minutes of play, quickly expanded that lead by 3 more goals until Japan was able to claw back to 4-2. But it wasn't enough, as the United States ultimately claimed victory with a final score of 5-2. The sportsmanship exhibited on the field was exemplary. In fact, Japan's coach had this to say about Carly Lloyd, who scored 3 goals in the game. "She is an excellent player. I really respect and admire her." Unfortunately, Americans celebrated the win in less than appropriate ways. There were tweets of an atomic bomb with Carly Lloyd's head on it, noting, "This is for Pearl Harbor." Another tweet by Sean Garcia said, "They destroyed Pearl Harbor, we destroyed their dreams." But on the opposite side of the coin, Crypto Terra tweeted, "Of course Pearl Harbor is trending now. Do you think we could get through an international sporting event without being racist?" And Camden Jones said, "Everyone making Hiroshima Nagasaki jokes. Y'all wouldn't appreciate if the Japanese made Pearl Harbor jokes when they beat the United States. Think." And that's truly the salient point. Those posting the tasteless images simply weren't thinking. Or perhaps, well, maybe they were incapable of thinking. Sadly, the world is becoming less and less a place where critical thought and analysis is valued in favor of behavior that makes one feel artificially superior at another's expense. I'm thrilled and tickled to death that some stepped in and put things in perspective. Now, if you truly feel the United States is the greatest nation on earth, act great. And those are this week's stories for the Asia Brief. If you have any thoughts, I hope you'll take a moment to leave them in the comments on Facebook or Twitter. This episode of the Asia Brief features extended content of material originally broadcast as part of the Asia News Weekly podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, please share it with your friends, and if you haven't, subscribe. Subscribing is free, and when you do, the next episode is delivered automatically to you. You can subscribe on our website, asiannewsweekly.net, or in your favorite podcast application. You can also keep up with more news from the region by following Asia News Weekly on Facebook or Twitter. And if you have any comments, questions, or feedback, please drop us an email message. That address is podcast@asiannewsweekly.net. Thank you so much for joining us, and until next time, remember to be true to yourself and to always be awesome.